I didn't slam the door. I didn't scream. I didn't even leave a note. I just walked out. The sun hadn't even risen yet when I zipped up my duffel bag, left my keys on the counter, and stepped out of the apartment Mia and I had called home for 5 years. My shoes echoed down the empty hallway. No one saw me go. It had only been 12 hours since I found out the woman I was going to marry had slept with not one, not two, but three random men during her bachelorette party. A wild night, her best friend Brittany called it, like it was some kind of badge of honor. I had the proof. Video footage burned into my mind like acid. I didn't need explanations. I didn't need apologies. I needed out. As I drove down the highway with the early morning fog swallowing the road ahead, my hands shook on the steering wheel. Not from fear, from rage, from heartbreak, from that hollow echo of betrayal that kept bouncing in my chest like a broken drum. She didn't know I knew. Not yet. Last night she came home humming some stupid pop song, dropped her heels at the door, and kissed me like everything was fine, like she hadn't thrown away our entire future for a few hours of drunken chaos and testosterone. I looked her in the eye and smiled. It was the last lie I ever told her. I remember staring at that flash drive, not wanting to believe what I'd seen. She, dancing on a stage with a stranger. Her kissing another man while her friends screamed like it was the halftime show. Her walking into a hotel room with three guys and laughed like she was on vacation, not on the eve of committing to forever. I couldn't sleep after that, couldn't eat, could barely breathe. Now I was heading to a place with no cell signal, no wedding plans, and no Mia. Just me, silence, and the road. People always say heartbreak feels like drowning. That's wrong. It feels like being buried alive with everyone around you smiling, clapping, congratulating you while you're screaming from 6 feet under and no one hears. Now I was digging myself out, 1 mile at a time. My name's Ryan Carter, and for most of my life, I thought being the good guy would be enough. I grew up in a small working-class town in Pennsylvania where people still left their doors unlocked and Sunday dinners were sacred. My dad was a mechanic, the kind of man who fixed things with his hands and didn't say much unless it really mattered. My mom was a school secretary with a voice like warm honey and a smile that made everyone feel welcome. I was their only child, the quiet one who preferred books over baseball and spent hours drawing or tinkering with old electronics in the garage. From a young age, I was told I had an old soul. I got straight A's not because anyone made me, but because I didn't like the idea of disappointing people. I went to Penn State on a scholarship, studied computer engineering, and got my first real job before I even graduated. By 24, I had a stable income, a decent apartment, and a 5-year plan. I wasn't flashy. I didn't party much. I never cheated on a test or a girlfriend. I believed in hard work, quiet nights, and building a future one careful step at a time. Then I met Mia. She was the opposite of everything I was, vibrant, spontaneous, loud in a way that made people lean in instead of turning away. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party, one of those rooftop things where everyone is overdressed and trying too hard to look cool. I was about to leave early when I heard this contagious laugh from across the rooftop. That was Mia. She had this way of lighting up a room without trying. Wavy, dark hair, eyes that made you feel like you were the only person in the world, and a reckless charm that should have been a red flag, but wasn't. Not to me. We talked for hours that night about music, travel, favorite childhood cartoons. I remember thinking, so this is what chemistry feels like. She kissed me first. I wasn't even sure it was real until I felt her hand on my chest and her lips on mine. 2 weeks later, we were inseparable. She moved into my apartment a year later, bringing with her more throw pillows than I thought legally allowed and a ridiculous number of scented candles. We had different rhythms. She stayed up late, I got up early, but it worked. Somehow, it worked. She teased me for color coding our bookshelf. I teased her for never replacing the toilet paper roll. We argued about little things, how she always left lights on, how I hated when she interrupted me mid-sentence. But it never lasted. We had this unspoken rule, no matter what, we'd talk it out before bed. And we always did. She said I grounded her. I said she made life less boring. Looking back now, I wonder how much of that was real and how much was just a story I told myself. Still, for years, I believed we were solid. I watched her cry at sappy movie trailers, saw her help strangers carry groceries, and listened to her talk about wanting 2 kids and a golden retriever. We planned trips, made Pinterest boards for our future house, and argued over baby names. She said she wanted a backyard with fairy lights. I said I'd build her the pergola myself. When I proposed on a hike in upstate New York, just us, the trees, and the sunset, she said yes, with tears in her eyes. I thought I had found myself forever. I wasn't naive. I knew love took work, but I also believed that if you chose each other every day, that work wouldn't feel like a burden. I didn't know back then that love could be so easily undone by one night, one decision, one flash drive. And I certainly didn't know that the woman I thought I knew better than anyone was a stranger in the end. Our first year living together was messy in all the best and worst ways. Mia couldn't cook to save her life, and our first attempt at making homemade pasta ended in flour-covered floors and takeout pizza. But I remember those nights more than any dinner at a fancy restaurant. The way she danced in the kitchen barefoot, singing along to 90s pop like the whole world was her stage. It made everything else fade away. She had dreams of opening a boutique someday, something with handmade jewelry, thrifted clothes, and maybe a little coffee bar in the back. I helped her make mock logos and set up an Instagram page, even though she never posted more than 3 times. I believed in her, more than she believed in herself. She was impulsive in a way that scared me, but also pulled me out of my comfort zone. One weekend, she booked our tickets to Mexico because we needed some sun. I almost said no, but she smiled that crooked smile and said, "Ryan, life's too short to stay comfortable." That trip was the first time I'd ever gone snorkeling, the first time I let myself get sunburned and not care. She pushed me, and for a while I thought that was a good thing. Even when she drank too much at parties or stayed out late with her friends, I chalked it up to her being free-spirited. She'll grow out of it, I told myself. She's just blowing off steam before we settle down. I trusted her. That was my biggest strength, and now I know maybe my biggest flaw. There were moments, of course, tiny red flags I ignored, her phone lighting up with texts from Brittany late at night, stories about club nights I wasn't invited to, a weird gut feeling when she came home at 3 a.m. smelling like tequila and smoke. But I never accused, never questioned. That wasn't the kind of man I wanted to be. I told myself love meant giving someone the benefit of the doubt. The day we started planning the wedding felt surreal. She was giddy, flipping through bridal magazines, obsessing over flower arrangements, arguing about whether to do a beach wedding or a vineyard. I was just happy to see her excited. I let her take the lead, paid deposits, and listened to her vent about bridesmaid drama. I thought we were building something real. And that's the part that still haunts me, the fact that I wasn't just in love with her. I was building a life with someone who was building a lie. It started with a package, a small, glittery bag sitting at the foot of our apartment door, as it had just been dropped off by a drunk fairy godmother. At first glance, it looked harmless, cute even. The tag attached to it read, "To the wildest bride-to-be, you deserved every second of it. Love, Brittany." I was home early that day. My shift at the office ended unexpectedly at 3 p.m., so I thought I'd surprise Mia with dinner and wine. We'd been so busy with wedding planning that I figured a quiet night would be a nice change of pace. I bent down, picked up the bag, and walked into her apartment. It jingled faintly as I set it on the counter. I stared at it for a few moments, a strange tension creeping up my spine. The tag bothered me more than I wanted to admit. You deserved every second of it? What kind of second were we talking about here? I tried to shrug it off. Brittany was always over the top, loud, messy, wild, in that performative look-at-me way. Mia loved her, though, swore was the most loyal friend anyone could ask for. Me, I tolerated her. Still, curiosity gnawed at me. I told myself I wasn't snooping. It was just a bag sitting out in the open, and it was practically inviting someone to peek. So I peeked. First came the harmless stuff: a plastic tiara, a cheap bride's last ride sash, a bottle of glittery nail polish, and some confetti that immediately scattered across our counter like fairy dust. But then, at the bottom of the bag, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. As a pair of boxers, men's boxers, and not new ones. These had been worn. They weren't just some gag gift or novelty item. I picked them up by the edge as they might bite me and held them at arm's length. My stomach twisted. Maybe it's a joke, I muttered aloud, trying to rationalize. Some dumb prank. But then I saw the flash drive. It was small and black, the kind of thing you might mistake for a keychain if you weren't paying attention. My instincts screamed at me to leave it alone, but another voice, smaller, angrier, told me I had the right to know. I plugged it in. There was only one file, a video. My heart pounded in my chest as I double-clicked it. The screen lit up, and there she was. Mia. My Mia. Laughing in a booth with her friends, drink in hand, tiara on her head. She looked beautiful, radiant, like the center of the universe. But the video didn't stay innocent for long. The camera zoomed in as she stood up, walked over to a stage, and started grinding on a male stripper. Her friends cheered like it was the Super Bowl. I paused the video. My hands were shaking. I wanted to stop. I should have stopped. But I didn't. I hit play again. The next clip showed her dragging the stripper off stage into a private room. Then came another scene. Mia, surrounded by three men in what looked like a lounge area. They were drinking and flirting. One kissed her, she kissed him back, another leaned in, then another. The last frame was her leading all three of them into a hotel room. I couldn't breathe. I sat there in our kitchen, surrounded by glitter and confetti, staring at a screen that had just dismantled 6 years of my life. That night, she came home smiling, happy. She kissed me on the cheek and asked if I'd picked a tie for the wedding yet. I looked at her and nodded, heart hammering in my chest, pretending I hadn't just watched her cheat on me in high definition. I couldn't sleep. I lay there beside her, frozen, while she curled up against me like everything was fine. The next morning, she left for work humming, and I started packing. I didn't bother organizing my things, I just grabbed essentials. Clothes, my laptop, chargers, passport, toothbrush, whatever fit into my duffel bag. I didn't want to think about what I was doing. If I paused, I knew I'd second-guess myself. I'd start remembering our late-night talks, her sleepy smile, and the way she used to trace circles on my arm while we watch movies. But I couldn't afford that, not anymore. The truth was too loud. As I packed, my phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Mia. Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. Tacos and wedding playlist. I stared at the screen like it belonged to someone else. My hand shook so hard I nearly dropped it. I didn't reply. I couldn't. What was I supposed to say? Hey, sounds great. By the way, saw you hook up with 3 dudes on camera. Hope the tacos are good. No. This wasn't something we could talk about. It wasn't a fight or misunderstanding. It was betrayal in its rawest form. Still, a part of me, some deeply conditioned, loyal part, wanted answers, closure. But I knew better. I knew how this conversation would go. She'd cry, deny, blame the alcohol, blame Brittany, say it didn't mean anything, beg for forgiveness, promise it would never happen again. And I'd be expected to stay, to rebuild trust that had been nuked into ashes. So instead, I booked a cabin 2 hours out of town, remote, quiet, paid for a full week, no refund. Then I grabbed the folder with our wedding contracts, venue, catering, band, photographer, and I made a call. I canceled everything. The woman on the other end sounded sympathetic. Can I ask why? She said gently. Change of plans, I replied, my voice hollow. Life happens. I didn't look back. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't want to give our apartment that kind of ceremony. It wasn't a goodbye, it was an escape. As I drove, I watched the city fall away in the rearview mirror, replaced by trees, open skies, and the fading echo of a life I thought was mine. Somewhere along the drive, I realized something chilling. She hadn't made a mistake. She'd made a choice. She chose to do it, to laugh, to kiss, to sleep with strangers, while her friends filmed and cheered like it was a game. And I had chosen, finally, to stop pretending that being the good guy would save me. I wasn't running away. I was freeing myself from a lie wrapped in glitter, tied with a ribbon of false promises. And as the road stretched endlessly before me, one thought kept ringing in my head. This was only the beginning. The small cabin in the middle of the woods brought a kind of silence that wasn't as comforting as I had imagined. Everything was so still it felt haunted. The spotless kitchen, the cold fireplace, and the perfectly still lake in front of the porch all made the world feel like it was holding its breath. But that silence didn't soothe me, it smothered me. Every creak in the wooden floorboards and every gust of wind through the trees dragged me back to the same painful reality. I couldn't escape the image of Mia smiling as she kissed some stranger, Brittany cheering in the background, and that video playing in my head like a cursed loop. I tried everything to shake it off. Long walks, cooking, reading, nothing worked. The betrayal carved itself into me like a second heartbeat, erratic, heavy. After a full day of avoiding my phone, it started vibrating constantly. Dozens of missed calls and texts from Mia poured in. She was panicked, her voice shaky in every message, asking where I was, why my stuff was gone, and what was going on. As her messages shifted from concern to begging, then to blame, I knew I had made the right decision. I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say to her. Instead, I messaged Brittany using a burner number. I wasn't stupid. I told her I was Ryan and that we needed to meet at the coffee shop on 7th Street tomorrow at noon. I kept it vague. She replied within minutes, asking if I or Mia was okay. I said nothing. The next day, I parked a few blocks away and watched from my car. Sure enough, Brittany walked in right on time, looking more like she was ready for a fashion show than a serious conversation. Bright pink blazer, impossible heels, sunglasses indoors. Classic Brittany. I walked in and sat across from her without saying a word for a few seconds. She smiled nervously, trying to act like nothing was wrong, but her eyes kept darting around. When I showed her the video on my phone, that smile disappeared. She stammered, then laughed weakly, saying it was just normal bachelorette party stuff, nothing serious. I didn't let her spin it. I said exactly what it was. 3 men, 1 night, a video documenting the whole thing like a highlight reel. And she had the nerve to send it to Mia like a trophy. She flushed, stuttered out some nonsense about Mia still loving me and called it a one-time thing. But no one got to redefine betrayal for me anymore. That night, I opened my laptop, wrote a single email, attached the video, and sent it to a few of our closest mutual friends. The ones who deserved to know the truth. No notes, no explanation, just facts. By the next day, the dominoes began to fall. Rachel was the first to reply. She wasn't as wild as Brittany, but had been in the video too, laughing, clapping, handing me another shot. Her message was soaked in guilt, saying she hadn't realized it had gone that far. I didn't answer. Soon, whispers started. Chloe, not too close to Mia, but always kind, messaged me saying she couldn't believe Mia had done that. She offered her support. Then Mia's messages turned from panic to rage. She demanded to know why I was spreading the video around, accusing me of destroying everything. I stared at her words and felt nothing but confirmation. This wasn't remorse, it was damage control. Then came Janet, Mia's mom. She texted that the family was worried, that Mia was a wreck, and begged me to come talk. I almost ignored her, but I realized they needed to see it. They needed to witness who their daughter really was. The next morning, I drove back to the city to Janet and Henry's house. Janet opened the door, a mix of relief and dread on her face. Henry sat stiffly in the living room, cold and watchful. I handed them the USB. "Watch this before we talk," I said. Janet cried. Henry paced and muttered curses. I barely spoke, just enough to make it clear I wasn't marrying Mia. I wasn't cleaning up her mess, and I left. After that, things collapsed fast. Henry and Janet withdrew all support. They kicked Mia out. Friends began distancing themselves. Brittany, true to form, played the victim and called me vindictive in a group chat I wasn't even in. But screenshots found their way to me. Every word only solidified that I had done the right thing. Mia lost her job within a week. The chaos reached her workplace. Someone had sent the video to her manager. HR called it inappropriate behavior affecting the company image. She was let go under the guise of downsizing. That night, she texted me that she had nothing left, begging me to forgive her. But I hadn't left her. She had destroyed everything. I had only handed her a mirror. Eric, another mutual friend, called me days later. Mia had reached out to him too, begging for a place to stay, another shot at starting over. He said no. He didn't just hurt you, he told me. She humiliated you, and we all watched it happen. Rachel unfollowed Mia on social media. Chloe blocked Brittany. Group chats went silent. Everyone who once cheered her on now acted like they hadn't seen a thing. That's the nature of public betrayal. Once the mask drops, no one wants to be caught holding it. Mia ended up bouncing from couch to couch. Then, according to Chloe, she found a room in a rundown neighborhood. No savings, no support, just a mattress on the floor and a job at a coffee shop paying minimum wage. Her last message came on a Thursday night. She wrote that if any part of me remembered who we were, to please talk to her. She didn't know how to live with what she had done. I read the message, and for a moment, I felt something. Not pity, not forgiveness, clarity. She was finally feeling what I had felt the moment I hit play on that video. And for the first time since I walked away, I felt free. After I read Mia's final message, something in me shifted. It wasn't satisfaction or triumph. It wasn't even peace, not yet, but it was clarity. I understood now that walking away wasn't just about punishing her or reclaiming my pride. It was about reclaiming myself. For so long, my life had been tethered to hers, her routines, her friends, her chaos. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd surrendered in the name of love, or what I thought was love. At the cabin, days started to bleed into one another. I had no schedule, no demands, just silence and the slow work of stitching myself back together. I woke up early and took long hikes through the woods, letting the cold morning air burn through my lungs. The rhythm of my footsteps on dirt trails became meditative. I'd return sore and muddy, sometimes with twigs in my shoes, but each day I felt just a little less like a ghost. I stopped checking my phone. I didn't care what Mia had to say anymore, and I certainly didn't care about what her social circle was whispering. I left the burner phone in a drawer and powered off my real one. For the first time in years, I was unreachable, and it felt like breathing for the first time after being underwater too long. There were nights I still felt that sharp sting, the sucker punch of memory. I'd lie in bed and remember the way she used to laugh at my stupid jokes. The nights we stayed up planning our future. I remember how I used to look at her like she was the center of my world. And then that image would shatter, replaced by the video, the smirks, the betrayal. I didn't cry. I couldn't. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was mourning the death of a version of my life that would never come to be. One evening, I lit a fire in the pit behind the cabin. The air was crisp, the stars sharp against the black sky. I pulled out the wedding folder, the one filled with receipts, contracts, notes scribbled during planning sessions, and our guest list. I stared at it for a long time. Then I fed it to the flames, one page at a time. Watching it all curl into ash felt right, like I was releasing the final pieces of a dream that no longer belonged to me. Around that time, my mom called again. I'd told them I was okay, but she still wanted to check in. She asked if I was ready to come home. I wasn't, not quite. But I said I'd think about it. I extended my stay at the cabin by another week. I didn't have a plan for what came next, and for once, that didn't terrify me. I had savings, no commitments, and all the freedom in the world. I started journaling, something I hadn't done since college, just raw, unfiltered thoughts. Not for anyone to read, just for me to unload the weight I was carrying. In those pages, I started asking myself hard questions. How had I ignored the signs? Why did I let myself fall so deeply for someone who treated commitment like a temporary costume? What did I want moving forward? The answers didn't come all at once, but I knew one thing. I didn't want to be the guy who just survived something awful. I wanted to grow from it. I didn't want to carry bitterness like a shield. I wanted to rebuild with honesty, with intention. When I finally returned to the city, it wasn't to pick up where I left off, it was to start over. I terminated the lease on the apartment Mia and I had shared. The landlord didn't ask questions. I packed what little I had left there, some books, clothes, a couple of mementos, and left the keys on the counter. I rented a small studio in another part of town. It was modest, with creaky floors and outdated cabinets, but it was mine. No ghosts in the walls, just possibility. I also got back into old hobbies, playing guitar, photography, things that had fallen by the wayside when life became about wedding checklists and compromise. I even joined a local hiking group. No expectations, no pressure, just people who wanted to be outside and breathe. One day, while out on a trail with the group, a woman named Elise struck up a conversation with me. She had this easy smile and a quiet confidence that wasn't about drawing attention, but about presence. We talked about books, hiking spots, and life detours. I didn't feel the rush I once craved. I just felt seen. And that was enough. I didn't tell her anything about Mia or what had happened, not yet. I didn't want my past to be my introduction anymore. That story was done. It had its chapters, its lessons, its scars, but I was writing new pages now. A few weeks later, I got one final message from Mia. It came through email since I'd blocked her number. It was long, rambling, filled with apologies and memories. She said she still dreamed about us, still loved me, and still didn't understand how everything had gone so wrong. She said she didn't expect a response. She just needed me to know. I read it once, then I archived it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was simply done. What Brittany, Rachel, and Mia had done wasn't just about betrayal. It was about illusion. They lived in a world where accountability was optional, where fun meant stepping on people, and where consequences were just bad luck. I didn't want to live in that world anymore. I wanted real. I wanted simple. I wanted to build a life I didn't have to doubt. And slowly, brick by brick, that's exactly what I started to do. Healing, I've learned, doesn't come in waves, it comes in fragments, like moments when you laugh without guilt, sleep without nightmares, or look at the future without flinching. One morning, I brewed coffee in my little kitchen, sunlight pouring through the dusty blinds, and I realized it had been a week since I last thought about the video, not because I was pushing it down, but because I was finally thinking about other things. I began volunteering at a community center nearby, helping with adult literacy classes. It started as a way to fill time, but quickly turned into something that gave me purpose. Watching someone light up when they understood something they couldn't read before was humbling. It reminded me that life moves forward, not in grand gestures, but in quiet, persistent steps. I didn't erase Mia from my story. I didn't need to pretend she never existed, but I'd placed her exactly where she belonged, in the past. A hard chapter, an unforgettable one, but no longer the one I was stuck rereading. Some wounds don't need closure to heal. They just need time, space, and will to stop picking at the scabs. And as I walked forward, one step at a time, I finally understood. I hadn't lost everything. I'd found myself. In the weeks that followed, I felt like I was living in the eye of the storm, calm and quiet, but always aware of the chaos that had once swirled around me. The silence wasn't unsettling anymore. It was earned. I didn't go out of my way to keep tabs on Mia, but sometimes news filtered through mutual friends or small-town gossip. She was still living in that crumbling apartment on the other side of the city, working long hours at the cafe and barely getting by. Her once vibrant friend group had either distanced themselves or cut her off entirely. The queen bee had lost her hive. Strangely, I felt no joy in hearing about her downfall. There was a time I thought revenge would feel satisfying, that watching her struggle would somehow soothe the pain she caused me, but now I just felt removed, like I was watching someone else's life unravel from a distance, through a window I had long closed. What struck me most was how quickly people moved on, how little it took for Mia to become a cautionary tale rather than a person. Some called her reckless, others pitied her, but no one was stepping up to save her anymore. The net that had always caught her finally gave way, and she was left to face the world on her terms. Meanwhile, my world had expanded. I was no longer just the man who got cheated on or the ex-fiancé with a tragic story. I was becoming someone new. My days were filled with purpose, volunteering, hiking, reconnecting with family, and slowly nurturing new relationships, ones built on trust, not illusion. One afternoon, I ran into Eric, one of the few friends who had stayed neutral throughout the whole ordeal. We grabbed coffee, and after some small talk, he leaned back and said, "Man, you dodged a bullet." I smiled, not because I agreed, but because I finally understood what he meant. Sometimes, the universe doesn't save you from pain, it uses it to reroute your life. He asked if I'd ever considered dating again seriously. I shrugged. Maybe, I said, but only if it feels real, no masks, no games. I hadn't heard from Tasha since her outburst weeks ago. Word was she was busy salvaging her reputation. A few of her party videos leaked beyond our circle, and apparently her job had taken notice. It was poetic, in a way. The ringleader of the chaos is finally being forced to account for her recklessness. As for Rachel, she sent me a short message once. "I'm sorry for everything. I hope you find peace." I didn't reply, but I appreciated the gesture. At least she acknowledged her part in it all. That was more than I could say for Mia. Then, one quiet Sunday morning, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No return address, just my name, written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter from Mia. It was handwritten, long and raw. She confessed everything, her insecurities, her jealousy, how she felt she was losing herself in the version of life we were building. She admitted she didn't know how to be the kind of partner I needed, so she sabotaged it, thinking she'd feel free, but instead she'd destroyed herself. She didn't ask me to forgive her. She didn't beg for another chance. She just said she needed me to know she finally understood what she'd lost, and that she hoped someday I'd find someone who saw me the way she wished she had. I sat with that letter for a long time, reread it twice, and then I folded it up and placed it in the back of my journal, not out of sentiment, but because it felt like a period at the end of a sentence I'd been trying to finish for months. Closure doesn't always come in the form of confrontation or revenge. Sometimes it comes quietly, in your own time, through small choices that lead you back to yourself. And at that moment, with sunlight spilling across my kitchen table and a life of my design unfolding ahead of me, I knew I was free. Free. Over the next few weeks, I noticed something subtle but powerful. I had stopped bracing for impact. I no longer flinched when I saw a text notification or heard someone mention Mia's name. I didn't feel the need to explain my side of the story anymore. I had lived it, learned from it, and moved on. That was enough. My parents invited me over for dinner one weekend. It was the first time I'd seen them since everything came to light. My mom hugged me a little tighter than usual, and my dad gave me a nod that carried more weight than words. Over steak and mashed potatoes, we didn't talk about Mia. We talked about future plans, travel, and new hobbies. Life beyond the wreckage. At one point, my mom smiled and said, "You look lighter, Ryan, happier," and I realized she was right. I wasn't carrying the burden of trying to fix something broken anymore. I was just living. I also started seeing Elise more often. We weren't rushing into anything, but our connection was steady, kind, and rooted in mutual respect. We'd meet for weekend hikes, grab coffee, and share books. She never pried, never asked too many questions about my past. She simply showed up, and sometimes that's the most healing thing someone can do. One night, we sat on a bench overlooking the river, watching the city lights reflect off the water. Elise turned to me and asked, "Do you ever wish it had ended differently?" I thought about it for a moment and then said, "No, I think it ended exactly how it needed to." She nodded, not needing more explanation. I wasn't bitter anymore, not even toward Mia. If anything, I felt sorry for her, not because she lost me, but because she hadn't yet found herself. And until she did, no relationship would ever feel whole. I hoped she'd get there eventually. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, even if I'm not the one to grant it. With each passing day, the past felt smaller in my rearview mirror. It no longer defined me. I had taken the pain, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and I had built something better from it. Self-respect, resilience, and peace. And in the quiet, steady rhythm of my new life, I found something I thought I'd lost for good. Hope. Months passed, seasons changed, and so did I. I no longer measured my worth by someone else's validation. I stopped trying to rewrite the past or wonder how things might have been different. I simply woke up each day and tried to be better than I was the day before. Some scars still lingered, of course. There were songs I still skipped, places I avoided, and memories that arrived uninvited, but they no longer had power over me. They were just that. Memories, not monsters. I started writing again. Nothing serious, just journal entries, short stories, reflections. It felt good to put words to the journey, to see how far I'd come. I wrote not to remember her, but to remember me, the man who survived, rebuilt, and thrived. And on one crisp autumn morning, standing at the edge of a hiking trail with golden leaves crunching beneath my boots, I whispered something into the wind I hadn't said in a long time. Thank you. Not to her, not to anyone else, but to myself for choosing healing over hatred, peace over bitterness, and a future over a past I couldn't change. And with that, I took the next step forward. Free at last, whole again. After months of rebuilding, I finally felt settled, not just in my routines, but in my sense of self. I wasn't haunted by betrayal anymore, nor did I need external validation to feel whole. My peace wasn't just the absence of pain, it was the presence of purpose. But peace, I've learned, is not a permanent state. It's something you maintain, nurture, and sometimes fight for. And just when I thought the past had fully let go of me, a new thread pulled me back in. It started with a job opportunity. One of the nonprofit organizations I volunteered with had an opening for a full-time community outreach coordinator. The role was perfect, working with at-risk youth, helping them find their footing, and mentoring them through tough transitions. It was exactly the kind of work I'd found solace in. I applied, interviewed, and got the job within a week. The first few weeks were exhilarating. The kids were raw, honest, sometimes rough around the edges, but full of potential. I saw bits of myself in some of them, young, lost, needing direction. It felt good to give back, to be part of something that mattered. And then came the surprise. During a monthly partner event hosted by the organization, I was introduced to a representative from one of the city's new mental health initiatives. Her name was Julia, mid-30s, sharp eyes, quick wit. We shook hands, exchanged a few polite words, and then moved on. It was just another networking moment. Until 2 days later, when she emailed me personally. Hey Ryan, great meeting you at the event. Would love to grab a coffee and talk about possible collaboration. It sounded professional enough, so I agreed. What followed wasn't what I expected. Julia wasn't just smart. She was disarming in a way that made you open up without realizing it. Over coffee, we talked about our organization's mutual goals and how to better serve the community. But somewhere between the fourth sip and second laugh, the conversation drifted into personal terrain. She asked what got me into this work, and I hesitated before answering. I didn't give her the full Mia story, just the broad strokes. How I'd been through something painful that made me reevaluate everything, and how helping others helped me heal. She nodded with the kind of understanding that said she wasn't just listening, she was absorbing every word. Over the next few weeks, we kept in touch, at first about logistics, but eventually about life. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but it was honest, refreshing, and real. One evening, after a long day of outreach sessions, I found myself walking by the river again, the same bench Elise and I had once sat on. But this time, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what I was building. Julia had invited me to speak at a city youth summit, something I would have avoided months ago out of fear of being seen as the guy with baggage, but now I was ready. I stood on stage facing a room full of teenagers, parents, and counselors. I talked about second chances, not just the ones we give to others, but the ones we give to ourselves. I spoke about ownership, responsibility, and the quiet strength it takes to walk away from what no longer serves you. When I stepped off stage, the applause was humbling, but more than that, it was a reminder. I had something to offer, not despite what I'd been through, but because of it. Later that evening, Julia texted me, "That was powerful. You moved a lot of people tonight, including me." I sat with that message for a while, then typed back something I hadn't expected to write. "Thank you. I'm starting to believe in myself again." And I meant it. Not long after, Julia invited me to dinner. Not a work meeting, not a planning session, just dinner. I almost said no. Part of me still hesitated at the idea of stepping into something new. But then I reminded myself, this wasn't about replacing what I'd lost. It was about honoring who I had become. The night was simple, nothing fancy, just good food, a quiet corner table, and hours of unfiltered conversation. We talked about everything, our childhoods, past mistakes, hopes for the future. And when she touched my hand mid-sentence, there was no spark of panic, no rush of guilt, just warmth. That moment didn't mark the beginning of a new love story. It marked something more important, proof that healing works, that trust can be rebuilt, not rushed, that the past doesn't own your future unless you let it. As autumn gave way to winter, my life settled into a rhythm. Work, writing, volunteering, occasionally seeing Julia. I wasn't in a rush. I didn't need fireworks. I needed peace. And for the first time in a long while, I had that. Looking back now, I don't regret the pain. I don't wish the story had gone another way. If anything, I'm grateful. Not for the betrayal, but for the transformation it forced, for the truth it revealed, for the strength I found. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Life doesn't always go according to plan, but sometimes the detour is where you find the real destination. I had lost everything I thought I needed, and in doing so, I found everything I truly wanted. There were still moments that surprised me, triggers that surfaced when I least expected them, a wedding invitation in the mail, a song on the radio, a glimpse of a stranger who moved like Mia. They didn't wound me anymore, but they reminded me, and that was okay. Scars don't hurt, but they do speak. I started a new habit. Every Sunday, I'd take a long walk without my phone. No distractions, just my thoughts and the world around me. It became a ritual, my weekly reset. I used to spend those walks sorting through pain, but now I spend them dreaming of what I wanted next, not in love, but in life. I made a list one Sunday afternoon: build a cabin near the lake, publish a memoir, and run a mentorship program for young men. I didn't know if I'd achieve all of it, but for the first time in years, I believed I could. One crisp morning, as I watched the mist rise over the water, I realized something powerful. I had become the man I once needed: steady, kind, whole. Not because someone else completed me, but because I chose to rebuild piece by piece. Mia was a chapter, a painful one, yes, but not the story. My story was still being written, one sunrise, one hard conversation, one step forward at a time. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what came next. I walked back to my apartment that morning with a quiet smile. No fireworks, no grand revelation, just a steady heartbeat and a deep knowing. I was exactly where I needed to be, and that was more than enough. As a year now. A year since the video, the fallout, the silence that followed. A year since I packed my bags and drove away from a life I thought was mine. Sometimes it feels like it happened to someone else, like I read about it in a book or saw it in a movie. But then I remember how it felt, the weight in my chest, the disbelief, the cold, mechanical way my hands moved as I zipped up my duffel bag. Time doesn't erase everything, but it does give you perspective. And with enough perspective, you start to see not just what happened, but what it taught you. I've thought a lot about forgiveness, not the kind people ask for in desperation, but the kind you give yourself when the dust settles. At first, I told myself I could never forgive Mia. What she did wasn't a mistake, it was a choice, a series of choices. But over time, I realized I wasn't carrying her betrayal anymore. I was carrying my own anger. And that weight wasn't hers to bear, it was mine. So I let it go. Not for her, for me. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's just about release. About choosing not to let someone else's darkness dim your light any longer. Mia's chapter in my life is over. I don't know where she is now. I don't ask. I don't check. That part of the story is closed. And in its place, a new one has begun. In the years since, I've built a life that feels like mine. One is rooted in intention, not obligation. I moved into a small but cozy loft closer to the nonprofit's main office. It's nothing extravagant, but it's mine. The first night I slept there, surrounded by boxes and echoes, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. My daily life is simple. I wake early, run by the river, shower, then head to work. I lead workshops, meet with young men, trying to navigate a world that doesn't always make space for their pain and remind them that survival is strength, but healing is power. After work, I write. Not every day, not always well, but enough to remember that my voice matters. Some nights Julie and I meet for dinner, other times we just walk and talk. We've kept things light, slow, real. She knows I'm not in a hurry. She's not either. We're just two people who've seen what it means to fall apart, and now we're learning what it means to grow deliberately. One evening, after a long volunteer session, she said something that stuck with me. You don't flinch anymore when someone says her name. She didn't have to clarify. I knew who she meant. And she was right. That name no longer has power over me. Closure doesn't come in one grand gesture. It comes in 100 small ones. A laugh that doesn't catch in your throat, a breath that doesn't carry the weight of memory, a morning when you wake up and realize you didn't think about the pain even once the day before. I've stopped needing an apology to move forward. I realized the only person I truly needed to forgive was myself, for ignoring my gut, for staying silent when I should have spoken up, for clinging to a dream that was built on illusions. And once I did that, everything else followed. My parents visited a few months ago. They brought over some old photo albums and homemade pie. We didn't talk about Mia. We didn't need to. Instead, we laughed about old vacations and remembered my clumsy high school days. My mom hugged me before they left and whispered, "You look lighter, sweetheart." She was right. I felt lighter. I started therapy too, not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to stay whole. My therapist helped me unpack the parts of myself that still needed work. The trust issues, the tendency to bottle things up, and the fear of being hurt again. Slowly, I opened those boxes, one by one, and faced what was inside. Some friends didn't stick around, the ones who chose sides or just faded away when things got uncomfortable, but others did, and a few new ones came along, people who saw me not as the guy who got cheated on, but as someone worth knowing, scars and all. There's beauty in starting over, not just in the clean slate, but in the wisdom you carry forward. I no longer chase the idea of forever. I chase the truth, presence, peace. Sometimes, I catch myself smiling for no reason, just because the sun feels warm, the coffee tastes right, or the music on the radio fits the moment perfectly. That's the kind of joy you don't fake. That's the kind that stays. Now and then, I still get messages from people who heard about what happened. Some are shocked, some express sympathy, others share their own stories, tales of betrayal, heartbreak, and rediscovery. And while I don't have all the answers, I always tell them the same thing: you survive it, and then, if you let yourself, you become something stronger. One of the teens I mentor asked me last week, "How do you know when you've healed?" I paused before answering because it wasn't something I'd ever put into words. But after a moment, I said, "When you stop needing to explain the pain, when you realize it happened and it mattered, but it doesn't define you anymore." He nodded as he understood, and maybe he did. I know I'll fall in love again someday. I'm not afraid of that anymore, but for now, I'm just loving the life I've built, the quiet mornings, uh, the honest friendships, the work that fills my days with meaning. And if Mia ever thinks of me, if she ever wonders how I'm doing, I hope she finds peace too. Not for my sake, but for hers. Because no one wins in war, we only move forward when we choose peace. This is the part of the story they don't tell you, the part after the fallout, after the tears, the rage, the silence, the part where you rebuild, and, if you're lucky, the part where you bloom. Because healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without breaking. And I remember everything, but I'm still here, still whole, still rising. Next spring, I plan to take a solo trip, just me, a backpack, and the open road. Maybe I'll visit the mountains, maybe the coast. I haven't decided yet. All I know is I want to stand somewhere vast, breathe in the silence, and say thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just a thank you to life, to growth, to pain, for shaping me into peace, for finding me. There's something sacred about being your safe place, about not needing someone else to complete your story, about knowing that no matter what comes next, you've already made it through the worst and come out better. So here I am, standing in the aftermath, not broken, not bitter, but blooming, and I wouldn't change a thing. A few weeks ago, I got an email that took me by surprise. It's from a name I hadn't seen in over a year, Rachel. One of Mia's old friends, someone I hadn't thought about in months. The subject line was simple: no agenda, just closure. I almost deleted it without reading it, but something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the fact that I'm not the same person I was when all this happened. So I opened it. "Hey Ryan," it began. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I've debated writing this 100 times, and maybe I should have left well enough alone. But I wanted to say something that I never said back then. Something I should have. I'm sorry." She went on to talk about the Bachelorette party, about how things spiraled out of control, and how she regretted not stepping in. "I was weak," she wrote. "I let Tasha take the lead. I watched your life fall apart and said nothing. That's on me." It was strange reading her words. I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt done, the kind of done that doesn't need answers or apologies. Still, I replied, Rachel, thanks for reaching out. I appreciate the honesty. I hope you're doing well. That was it. No long speeches, no rehashing, just peace. But that email stirred something in me I hadn't expected. A thought I'd tucked away deep in a drawer I didn't open. What if closure wasn't just something I gave myself, but something I allowed others to try for too? So I started writing letters. Not to send, not to publish, just for me, and for Tasha, where I laid out everything I never got to say. Not out of anger, but with clarity. I wrote about how her actions weren't just reckless, they were cruel. How her need for chaos didn't just ruin a party, but an entire relationship. And how, in the end, she wasn't just a bystander, she was an accelerant. Another letter was for Mia. That one took the longest, not because I didn't know what to say, but because there was so much I had already let go of. Still, I wrote about the love we shared, the life we almost built, and the betrayal that burned it to the ground. I wrote about how I hoped she'd one day understand the difference between freedom and destruction. And I wrote, most importantly, that I no longer hated her. I just didn't know her anymore. I burned both letters in a fire pit outside my apartment the next evening. The flames felt symbolic, but they weren't about revenge. They were about to release. Watching those pages curl and turn to ash was like exhaling a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The next day, something shifted. I felt lighter, not just emotionally, but physically, as if my body was finally catching up to the healing my mind had already begun. I went for a walk that afternoon and found myself standing in front of a bookstore I hadn't visited in years. On impulse, I went inside. The smell of old paper, the soft hum of jazz from the speakers, it was like stepping into a memory I'd forgotten I loved. And that's when I saw her. She was standing in the nonfiction aisle, flipping through a book about architecture. Dark hair, pulled into a loose braid, simple jeans and a cardigan, no makeup, just effortlessly present. I wasn't looking for anything romantic. I wasn't even sure why I noticed her. Maybe it was the way she smiled at the book like it had told her a joke. Or maybe it was the calm she carried in her posture, a kind of self-possession I admired. We made eye contact briefly and she smiled. I nodded, gave a polite smile back, and turned away. I wasn't ready for anything more than that, and that was okay. What surprised me was how okay I was with just that moment. No longing, no regret, just acknowledgement. Life moves on. It does. The next few weeks passed quietly. The work was good. The nonprofit was expanding. I started co-facilitating a new program for young adults struggling after trauma. It felt full circle, guiding others through their grief, their confusion, their rebuilding, while knowing exactly what that path looks like. One evening, Julia invited me to a dinner party. It was a small group, artists, writers, musicians, people who had also lived through some version of falling apart. The conversation was rich, vulnerable, honest. At one point, someone asked, "What's one thing you've learned from your worst experience?" I didn't even hesitate. That it didn't break me, I said. Heads nodded around the table, and I knew right then that I was home. There's something sacred about reaching this point in your journey, not just surviving, but thriving. I'm not chasing closure anymore. I've found it in the smallest places, in the warmth of morning coffee, in the quiet stillness of my apartment, in the ability to laugh without remembering why I once couldn't. I don't check social media to see what Mia's doing. I don't ask mutual friends for updates. If her name comes up in passing, I don't flinch. I simply let the moment pass like a breeze through an open window. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm just done. And in being done, I've made room for joy, for discovery, for something new that isn't built on the ashes of the past. Maybe someday I'll fall in love again, maybe I won't. Either way, I'm whole. That's the part no one tells you. Healing isn't about finding someone new. It's about becoming someone new and realizing they were inside you all along. As I sit here writing this, the city hums outside my window. Life, in all its unpredictable beauty, goes on. And so do I. Not as the man who was betrayed, not as the man who ran away, but as the man who came back to himself. And that's the real love story. Me choosing me every single time. Next month marks my 32nd birthday. It feels like a quiet milestone, but an important one. I've decided to spend it alone by choice, not by circumstance. I booked a small cabin up north where the stars don't have to compete with city lights and the only noise is the rustle of trees. I'm bringing a journal, a stack of books, and zero expectations. I think that's the gift I've learned to give myself: space. Space to feel, to heal, to exist without performance or pretense. For the longest time, I thought love meant sacrifice. Being committed meant shrinking parts of yourself to make room for someone else. Now I understand that real love, whether it's romantic or self-love, doesn't ask you to dim. It asks you to rise, to become more of who you are, not less. If I could go back and speak to the version of me sitting on that cabin bed 1 year ago, duffel bag by the door, heart cracked wide open, I'd say this: hold on, not because it gets easier, but because you get stronger. And one day, this pain will become your power. And it has.